My once close sister turned into a bridezilla and banned me and my kids from her wedding because my son's wheelchair would ruin the photos. Months later, I told her husband the truth, and now she's accusing me of sabotaging her marriage because he thinks she needs therapy. The raw anger I felt when my sister told me I wasn't invited to her wedding, all because of my son's wheelchair, still burns. It was a betrayal that cut me to my core, a moment that changed everything between us. My sister Carol got married about 4 months ago. The tough part? My family and I weren't invited. This hit me hard because Carol and I have always been super close. But honestly, something shifted in her as soon as she got that ring on her finger. She became a total bridezilla, and not in a cute way. Within a couple of months, around the time invitations were going out, she called me. She told me I wouldn't be getting an invite because of my son's wheelchair. Can you believe that? It was so incredibly insensitive and just plain disrespectful. I didn't even argue. I just decided right then and there that she was out of my life. My 2 kids, my 12-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter, had always been close with their Aunt Carol, so this was a massive shock for all of us. My son had an accident 2 years ago, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since. He's been doing physiotherapy, and we're hopeful he'll walk unassisted again someday. But until then, the wheelchair is part of his life and people need to respect that. When Carol called and said she'd made up her mind about not inviting us because of him, I realized we'd grown into completely different people. There was no going back after that. I was stunned to say the least. Her excuse? She was concerned about how her wedding photos would turn out if my son was there, believing his wheelchair would ruin the pictures. Seriously? The easy solution obviously would have been to just ask the photographer to avoid including him in certain shots if it was that big of a deal to her. But I didn't even bother suggesting it. The very idea was insensitive enough. After that call, I simply told her I was fine with not being invited and left it at that. I only told my husband, knowing that if I said anything to anyone else, it would cause a huge drama. And I wanted to protect my son from all of it. So I kept quiet. In the months leading up to the wedding, even though I knew I wasn't invited, I put on a happy face around my parents and Carol. She did the same. So, when I didn't show up at her wedding, a lot of people were genuinely surprised and reached out to ask why. Even then, I didn't tell them the truth. I just said my father-in-law had fallen ill, and we needed to be with him. No one questioned it, not even my parents or my brother-in-law, Kevin. Things finally blew up recently at my cousin's engagement party. Since we were all in one place, Kevin cornered my husband and me. He said he was really disappointed we hadn't shown up to the wedding and hadn't been in touch afterward. He understood my father-in-law's illness but couldn't grasp why we'd completely disappeared. He and I had always been close. Carol had been with him for 4 years before they got married, so he was practically family. I tried to apologize, to brush it off, and promise we'd make it up to him. I really didn't want to explain the real reason. But Kevin wouldn't budge. He insisted he knew something was wrong and wanted to know if he'd offended us. Kevin is such a sweet guy, and I really didn't want him to blame himself. So my husband and I decided to tell him the truth. He deserved to know. I told him about Carol's phone call, how she said she didn't want us there because of my son. I explained that I'd kept it quiet to avoid drama before their big day. Especially given how sensitive I am about my son. Kevin was absolutely shocked. He completely understood why I hadn't brought it up and why I distanced myself from Carol. He even apologized on her behalf, saying if he'd had any idea she would say something so awful, he would have stopped her. He was genuinely, deeply apologetic. For the rest of the party, Carol shot daggers at me because Kevin stayed by our side the entire time, ignoring her. He was clearly disturbed by what he'd learned. I don't blame him. I'd be horrified if my partner treated their own sibling that way. I thought that would be the end of it, but no. Just 3 days after the party, my parents called me. They'd found out the real reason I missed the wedding. They claimed they didn't want to get involved, but then they dropped the bomb. Carol was expecting, and she and Kevin were fighting nonstop. Kevin was insisting she go to therapy, believing she was cruel and heartless for what she'd done. Carol, of course, thought she was right and that her wedding would have been a bust otherwise. I'm with Kevin on this, she was cruel. My parents kept saying they weren't taking sides, repeating it 4 or 5 times, but it totally felt like they agreed with Carol. They tried to make it seem like I was sabotaging her marriage by telling Kevin the truth. I found it ridiculous. My husband agreed, saying I had nothing to apologize for. But I still wanted a second opinion. Was I wrong for telling Kevin and throwing her under the bus? I couldn't shake the feeling my parents were trying to guilt-trip me, so I confronted them. I went to their house and laid out everything that was on my mind. Initially, they denied it all, saying they just didn't want their daughters fighting and thought I might take the initiative to sort it out. But that made no sense. If they truly didn't want to get involved, they wouldn't have contacted me. They could have told Carol to talk to me. Felt like manipulation, and I told them so. I'm not stupid, I could see what they were doing. Finally, they admitted it. A part of them did believe it was my fault for telling Kevin the truth. They said months had passed and everyone was over it, so I had no reason to dig it all back up and create trouble in her otherwise happy marriage just to get back at her. That stung. I had no intention of causing trouble in her marriage. I had nothing to gain from it. It was insulting that my parents thought so little of me. Carol, sure, I expected that from her. She'd created the mess, so she'd do whatever it took to play the victim. But my parents, especially after all their talk about not picking sides, I got really upset. I told them if that's what they thought, then it was clear whose side they were on. It was insensitive of them to blame me for telling Kevin the truth while completely overlooking the horrific truth itself. I wouldn't have even told Kevin if he hadn't insisted. Now that everything was out, I knew exactly where their priorities lay. They didn't care that their younger daughter had banned their grandson from her wedding for something completely beyond his control. They knew how sensitive I was about my son's injuries. It was a traumatic time for our whole family. Their nonchalance about it, trying to make me out to be overreacting, was just insane. They tried to argue, saying they did care about their grandson, but ultimately, it was Carol's wedding, and if she didn't want us there because of the wheelchair, they couldn't help it. They believed she was perfectly within her rights not to invite certain people. And yes, she was within her rights not to invite us. But I'm also perfectly within my rights to be offended by that. And if I choose to distance myself from her and never speak to her again, that's fine. Most importantly, if I decided to tell her husband what she did, that should also be fine. If she makes a decision like that, she should have the guts to stand by it. They kept telling me I was making a huge deal out of nothing. After all that, I saw no point in continuing the conversation. I just left. It was obvious they had picked sides and I wanted no part of it. My husband was glad I stood up for myself. His opinion is the only one that matters to me now. I blocked Carol everywhere after that. It's been about a week since the party and 3 days since the fight with my parents. Everyone's blocked now except Kevin, of course. Since I was unreachable, Carol actually reached out to my son on Instagram, asking him to get in touch with me. He was pretty confused. We hadn't talked much about his aunt recently, and while he didn't know the exact details, he definitely sensed things weren't right. He's a bright kid and picks up on everything. He'd asked several times what was going on and I'd always dodged the topic. But this time he insisted, especially after Carol mentioned I'd blocked her. He knew that was extreme. At first I thought about keeping it from him, but then I decided against secrets. I told him the real reason we'd skipped his aunt's wedding. I knew it would hurt him, but I couldn't hide it forever. And I was afraid if I didn't tell him, he might find out some other way. He's turning 13 soon, and I wanted him to make his own choice about his relationship with her. I had no idea how he'd react. I'm sensitive about his injury, but he's 10 times more so. Surprisingly, he took it really well. He thanked me for keeping it from him for so long, even though he'd been curious. Now that he knew the real reason, he completely understood why I'd blocked her. I tried to make sure he was okay, worried I'd burdened him. But the more we talked, the more I realized how mature he is. He said he would have found out eventually anyway, because this fallout seemed like something our family wouldn't easily move on from. He told me that while other kids might not like hearing something like this, he preferred honesty. He's dealt with enough trauma for a lifetime, so this petty behavior doesn't faze him anymore. Hearing him talk like that, putting on such a brave face, even though I knew he and Carol used to be close, made me incredibly proud. My husband and I raised him right. I'm so glad I was honest with him. I've tried to gauge if he's truly okay, or just putting on a front, but it seems he genuinely doesn't care what his aunt thinks. I know deep down it must hurt a little, but we're all there for him. His dad, his sister, his friends, his teachers. I know with time all his wounds, physical and emotional, will heal. He'll be just fine, and even if he isn't, we'll be right there with him. I'm certain of that. Before I share the latest, I want to address the concerns about telling my son the truth. My son and I have always had an open, honest relationship. My husband, my parents, and I believe honesty is best for him. I tried to hide it for a long time to protect him, but when he insisted, I felt obligated. If he hadn't heard it from us, he might have heard it from his grandparents or worse, Carol herself. She already had no qualms dragging him into this by contacting him, so she might have gone further. It was better he heard it from us. I stand by my decision, and as long as my family is okay with it, I'm okay with it. Anyway, back to what happened with Carol. She showed up at my house out of the blue this evening. I immediately knew drama was brewing, so I sent the kids to the neighbors. I didn't want them hearing anything crazy. As soon as they left, she started in on me, furious that I'd talked to Kevin. She called me vindictive and petty. She complained that Kevin hadn't spoken to her properly for days, refusing any discussion until she agreed to therapy. Every time she tried to explain herself, he'd just end the conversation or walk away, and it always ended in a fight. She was sick of it, and felt he was actively avoiding her, coming home as late as possible. Honestly, I didn't see anything wrong with what he was doing. I probably would have done the same. When she finished her rant, I told her none of this was my fault. I refused to be blamed. I told her if she'd just been a good person, she wouldn't have to worry about her actions. Her guilty conscience was making her project onto me, calling me vindictive and vengeful. Deep down, she knew she'd messed up, but she wasn't ready to admit it, so she was trying to make me the bad guy. I expected her to argue more. She looked ready to fire back. But then she just broke down. Right there on my couch sobbing. My husband and I were totally surprised. We just stood there awkwardly. Eventually, I sat beside her, not consoling her, just waiting for her to calm down. Then she started apologizing. She said I was right, and she'd realized a while ago how insensitive and disrespectful she'd been. The reason she was taking it so hard? Kevin had put their plans to have a baby on indefinite hold. He wanted her to go to therapy because her treatment of her nephew was so heartless. He couldn't trust her to be a good mother right now. That had shattered her. She'd been so ready to be a mom, looking forward to it since she got married, but now it seemed unlikely anytime soon. That's why she'd been so frustrated and angry, trying to run from the situation and find a scapegoat, which had been me. But the more she thought about it, the more she couldn't blame anyone but herself. She was truly sorry. I was speechless. I'd expected another huge fight. My husband and I looked at each other, then told her we forgave her, but we really did suggest therapy. Her behavior lately had been unreasonable and disturbing, and maybe Kevin had a point. She probably wasn't ready to be a mother yet. It was harsh but true. She cried some more, and this time I did console her a little. I felt bad for her. As she was leaving, I told her I still needed some space, that I wasn't over everything. She seemed to understand, said nothing, and promised to keep her distance. I don't know what the future holds for us, if we'll ever truly reconcile. But for now I'm content. I haven't spoken to my parents since our fight. Even if I reconcile with Carol, I don't think I'll do the same with them. They've always had a soft spot for Carol, even if they tried to hide it. Over the years, I've noticed how they expect me, as the older sister, to make all the sacrifices, do all the forgiving, and just be more lenient. But I'm not playing that role anymore. Nothing is more important than my husband and my kids. If people don't value them, they don't value me, because we are one unit. And I'm not forgiving anyone who's been disrespectful towards my son anytime soon. After Carol left, I told my son she had apologized. He said it didn't really matter to him, as he decided not to let anything affect him in the first place. He's fine with whatever. I think that's a pretty chill way to handle it, but he's still young, so who knows how long he'll feel that way. It's been 3 years since my last update, and there's been a huge development. My son can now walk with crutches. He still needs some help and is getting used to moving around without his wheelchair, but he's making slow, steady progress. He still needs the wheelchair when he gets tired, but doctors say we can hope for even more progress, maybe even walking unassisted someday soon. It's such an exciting time for our family, and we're overjoyed. Carol and I aren't constantly in touch like we used to be, but we do talk sometimes. Recently, I congratulated her on her new baby, and a couple of weeks ago, She reached out to congratulate me on my son's progress after I shared it on social media. Yes, she and Kevin finally had a baby. They went to counseling and gradually worked things out. Things aren't the same between us anymore. But she has apologized to both me and my son. Maybe someday we'll go back to how we used to be, but this works for now. My parents and I are still not on talking terms, and I'm completely fine with that. I'm happy with my life, and now that my son's getting better, I'm even happier than before.